Honourable members, the ayes are 61, the noes are 59. Schedule 3 will stand part. The question now is that clauses 1 and 2 stand part. I call the honourable member Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. This bill is the innocuously named New Zealand International Convention Centre Bill. Sounds like a lovely idea, except it's not the right title. The correct title here is the Sky City Crony Capitalism Looking After Their Mates by the National Party Bill, because that's what this should be called. And we've just been voting through the schedule. It's a long title. They also got rid of 20 years ago, Mr Goff. But if we actually were to look at the schedules that we've just been voting on, we'll see that they contain the guts of what is in this agreement. And it is important, and what I suspect will be one of my final contributions on this bill, to actually remind members of the public what it is that has been given away here. So what's been given away here is a massive extension to the licence for Sky City out to 2048. Within that period, 2 reviews required under the Gambling Act are dispensed with. Secondly, we have an additional 230 single terminal gaming machines. We have an additional 240 automated table gaming terminals. We have an additional 12 further gaming tables. We have the introduction of cashless gaming machines. We have the ticket in, ticket out provisions which have been put up by the officials as being having the possibility of allowing for money laundering. Those are the concessions. Those are the things that in this bill mean that the title is inappropriate because they directly contradict the Gambling Act. They are the things that make this bill not about an international convention centre, but actually about crony capitalism, about one firm, one company in New Zealand being treated differently from the rest of the companies in New Zealand. And that started, Mr Chair, on the very first day. That started when the Prime Minister wrote on top of the officials' briefing note, "Cover off the Sky City angle." At that moment, the crony capitalism button was pushed, and the government's officials went off into a separate line of negotiations with Sky City. Sky City then got more information than other bidders did about the process. They were invited to put in proposals that other bidders were not invited to put in place. That point, the process was rorted, the process was wrong, and that was at the direction of John Key, the Prime Minister. The crony capitalist in chief, John Key, who came across the top of a process to build an international convention centre in Auckland, did a deal, did a dodgy deal. He's up to his neck in it, and that should be reflected, Mr Chair, in the title of this bill. So that's the first step at which things went wrong. Then the legislation to do this is introduced to the House, Mr Chair, and I spoke about it last night in Clause 6.2 of this bill. We have the sight of the national government deciding to override the laws of this land via their dodgy backroom deal. The Gambling Act and associated gambling legislation is ridden roughshod over by this law. So this is no ordinary piece of law coming to this House. It's a law that justifies the government's dodgy backroom deals, it rides roughshod over other legislation, and it puts in place concessions that go against the Gambling Act. And Mr Chair, there is no doubt whatsoever that gambling harm will be increased by this legislation. And the government's actually acknowledged that by not amending the Gambling Act, where its purpose is to reduce gambling harm, because they can't do that, because this increases gambling harm. Up to 5,000 extra problem gamblers created as a result of this, and all the flow-on effects through our communities, through families, through people who face the horrible addiction that is Class 4 gambling, particularly on the pokie machines. This is a bill that has the potential to increase money laundering through Sky City. It introduces types of gambling that across the world have seen increases to problem gambling. Mr Chair, this bill should not be before this House. This bill goes against the principles that New Zealanders believe in about how laws should be made and that a government will actually look after its citizens. The government's not here to do deals with its mates. The government is here to protect New Zealand citizens and ensure that they can go about their daily lives knowing that the government is there for them. We might not agree with every single thing that the party opposite does, but what we expect is that they will bring legislation to this House that supports and protects the rights of New Zealand citizens. That's not what they've done here, Mr Chair. They have brought a piece of legislation to this House that favours one company that goes against the values of New Zealand. It's a shameful piece of legislation.
I call the Honourable Member Materia Ture. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Tēnā koutou te whare. This legislation is only before the House because the government needs to exclude Sky City from the Gambling Act. If we remember, the Gambling Act puts in an express and absolute prohibition on the creation of any further casinos and on the expansion in any way of existing casinos. And Sky City has for some decades now been fighting the Gambling Commission on its decisions to refuse them further licences to expand their business for some decades. And so what they've done through this deal is to find an alternative way to get around the gambling law, because the gambling law has stopped them from expanding as they would like. And it's not like they don't make a huge amount of money. They make huge profits in any event. So it's just greed, frankly. So this legislation shouldn't be called the NZICC International Convention Centre Bill at all. This is about Sky City greed bill. This is the Sky City third largest casino in the country delivery device legislation is what this actually is. I don't know if people remember in the past around smoke-free and the tobacco inquiry, when cigarettes were described as nicotine delivery devices. You have to remember that. Nicotine delivery devices is what a cigarette is. And that is what this legislation and this Sky City deal is essentially a casino delivery device to Sky City. There would be no legislation in this House if there wasn't this deal that funds the building of a convention centre through the gambling concessions and the need to get around the Gambling Act. Now, part of the reason why this bill is structured as it is, rather than amending the Gambling Act, for example, is simply because the government did not want to have the public understand clearly enough and openly that the whole point of this deal was to give Sky City a legislative way of avoiding the constraints, the public health regulations in the Gambling Act. But if you took out of this legislation, and there's, 23 pages of words in this bill, if you took out all of those parts that are related to the Gambling Act and the concessions, you're only talking about 5 provisions, maybe a few more, maybe 7 provisions that are at all related to the convention centre itself, because very little of this deal requires any legislative changes. There's a little bit around the Flags Act. There's a little bit around the name of the convention centre, but essentially this entire bill is designed to give Sky City a mechanism around the Gambling Act. And that is because Sky City has for years been wanting to significantly expand their business, and now they can. Now what they have is the third largest casino being delivered to them by John Key. And we constructed, the Green Party, on the Tuesday just gone, reconstructed 4 members of Parliament and their policy people, the almost life-size replica of the 230 extra pokie machines, the 240 automated gaming terminals,